Welcome back to Creative Excuses. Today we are chatting about my Baldur's Gate 3 overhaul mod, BG3 Chocolate Edition. Version 2 is out now on PC, awaiting the update to release on consoles, but our topic for today is actually already live for consoles from an older version of the mod. Today we are talking about the Drunken Master Monk, the Drunk Monk, and now in Chocolate Edition, the Tanky Monk. Before we really begin though, thanks to everyone who's tipped to support the mod, chatted in my Discord about the changes, or helped test them. Your support has made all of this possible, and I'm really thankful for that. Also, if you like watching BG3 playthroughs, I do have a current Chocolate Edition run with episodes coming out periodically. The second episode just released recently. Alright, let's jump into it. In the vanilla implementation of the Drunken Master Monk, there are a few major problems with the subclass, all summed up by one word: anti-synergy. The Drunk Monk has a few features that look at first glance like they should be used together, but they actually turn out to just make the class kind of clunky. For example, Cheeky Tipple is a feature that lets the Drunk Monk drink alcohol without experiencing the negative penalties, which is pretty nice. But the main feature of Cheeky Tipple is actually that when you drink alcohol for the first time that day and you get drunk, you restore half of your key points routed down. The problem is that you probably want to be drunk as a Drunken Master, right? Especially if you want to take advantage of the drunk items like the Drunken Cloth or the Punch Drunk Bastard, which seems like it would be a common desire. That means you're going to get drunk at the beginning of a fight, which is precisely when you don't need to restore your key points. Add in the fact that Drunk Monk's kit is really key intensive, with easy ways to spend 3 to 6 key points per turn without any extra actions, and it just ends up a little clunky. The next example is worse though. At level 4 you unlock this cool punch called Intoxicating Strike, which can make your enemy drunk. That is pretty neat, and what's even neater is that you gain buffs for doing so. You get a buff to your armor class and attack rolls against drunk targets, all from a passive called Life of the Party. Cool. Except, at level 9, you get the ability Sobering Realization, which consumes the drunk effect on your target for some extra damage, and removes the bonuses you get from getting them drunk. So you apply the effect using a key point costing Intoxicating Strike, with the main benefit being armor class and enhanced attack rolls, and then you consume those very sizable bonuses and another key point for 2d8 psychic damage. It isn't a great trade, especially when you can just spend a key point on your variant of Flurry of Blows, which has the same cost and will likely hit just as hard or harder. It's almost always just better with the vanilla Drunk Monk to ignore Sobering Realization unless you are using the Resonant Stone to double the psychic damage. So the main problem with Drunken Master Monk is the anti-synergy of the kit. Cheeky Tipple doesn't give enough value if you want to use the drunk items. Intoxicating Strike and Sobering Realization looks like it should be a fun combat loop, but just ends up a little lackluster compared to the very strong Flurry of Blows variant. So how did I fix these problems? Let's start with Cheeky Tipple. If you've seen my video about the Way of the Four Elements monk rework that I did a long time ago, which is included in Chocolate Edition by the way, I added this feature over there called Nature's Plenty, where attacking with a melee weapon would let you regenerate key points if you passed a nature skill check. Well, Cheeky Tipple has received the same treatment. When you make a melee weapon or melee unarmed attack and hit something with it, you roll a DC 16 performance check. If you pass the check, you regain 1 key point. Over the course of a day-long adventure, this is going to be incredibly strong, giving you a lot of extra key points to work with, which is super important because I made the kit even more expensive to use than normal. I really like this kind of system though because it adds another point of tension to combat with the resource management. Sometimes you're going to be low on key points and you're going to pass the check, letting you pull off some really cool actions or abilities, and sometimes you won't and you're going to suffer for it. I love this system, I think it's super fun. But again, you're going to need this because I made the Drunk Monk's Flurry of Blows, called Drunken Technique, cost 2 key points instead of 1 to use. I did this for 3 reasons. First, it effectively functions as 2 attacks and a disengage, which is a really strong feature. So it just kind of makes sense on its face. Second, it gives you 2 chances to trigger Cheeky Tipple, so you would reasonably often actually profit off of this ability without the increased cost, especially if you're building for it. And third, I did this to incentivize the Intoxicating Strike and Sobering Realization loop, which we're going to turn to now. Intoxicating Strike received a buff in the form of an additional +2 to the save DC against becoming drunk. But just as important, it also receives additional damage equal to your Wisdom modifier. That can make this ability hit very hard for your main action attacks. At the end of the game, this can easily be 1d8 base, 1d8 from Chocolate Edition Tavern Brawler, plus 5 from Dexterity, and plus 4 from Wisdom, if you build for it. 2d8 plus 9 is pretty freaking strong, I would say, and if you build this as a Strength Monk, you can actually get that even higher with use of Strength Elixirs. I think you can hit something like 2d8 plus 12, which is really good. However, there is also a new benefit for attacking a drunk target, which makes this even better. When you damage a drunk target, instead of gaining a bonus to your armor class and attack rolls, you gain temporary HP equal to your character level plus 5. That means if you are consistently keeping a target drunk, you can regenerate up to 17 temporary hit points every single turn. You become a massive health sponge as long as you can keep the target drunk. It's worth noting though that the temporary hit points are truly temporary. They expire after 2 turns, so you have to keep getting targets drunk, or you've got to leave a target drunk in order to keep those temporary hit points coming in. But the core loop doesn't stop there. Sobering Realization has been buffed up. When you use it against a drunk target, you deal an additional 2d8 plus your Wisdom modifier in psychic damage, guaranteed. And if the enemy fails a saving throw and sobers up, they take another 1d8 psychic damage. That makes this punch equal to your unarmed damage plus your Wisdom modifier plus 3d8 psychic damage for a huge chunk of damage. It does, of course, sober the target up if they fail the charisma save, which means that you're going to have to go back to Intoxicating Strikes again. But with the buffs to Intoxicating Strikes, that doesn't feel bad in my opinion. Sobering Realization also doesn't remove your own temporary hit points, so your character isn't punished for using the ability. There is, of course, still a tiny bit of anti-synergy friction here. You want a target to be drunk in order to keep your temporary hit points coming in, but because the temporary hit points last until your next turn, you're always going to get at least 1 or 2 chances to make a target drunk on your next turn before the HP simply expires. This play pattern and the Drunken Master ends up quite powerful, dishing out very solid and respectable damage by getting your enemies drunk and then forcibly sobering them up. But this play pattern also makes you incredibly tanky, able to numb the pain with your own Drunken Mastery. Oh, right, I also didn't remove any Drunken Master features, or base monk features, so you still get all of the other juicy stuff like stunning strikes, redirecting attacks, and negating disadvantage, all while having the highest key point regeneration in the game, thanks to Cheeky Tipple. All in, with this toolkit, I think I see a few different build paths which are pretty neat. You can of course build for just straight damage as a Strength plus Wisdom monk. That would let you dish out very solid damage while using your temporary hit points as your main source of defense. This isn't a bad idea, especially if you've got a support who can throw some resistances your way. So that's one option. You can build for damage. Another is to build to be as big of a damage sponge as possible with lots of health and damage reduction, focusing on making enemies drunk to keep up your temporary hit points. You won't have the feats to deal incredible damage, of course, but you will be able to take a very big hit. Another option could be to focus on getting your save DCs as high as possible on Stunning Strike and Intoxicating Strike, while building for Charisma to keep the key points flowing in while you burn them as fast as possible. And that's all without multi-classing. You can also multi-class, skipping the Sobering Realization, and make some super funky things out of the Drunken Master Monk, which I think is really fun. Share your builds in the comments if you give this one a shot. I hope you enjoy being the life of the party. If you want to support the mod, read more about it, or pick it up for yourself, there are links in the description. Until next time, I'll see you all in the next excuse.